Hey. So we had just finished finding the intervals for increasing, decreasing, constant, negative, and positive values. All those pieces. And again, with those, we said that they were talking about the x values. And so when we did our interval notation, we were looking at the x values for it. Now, this time, what we're going to work on and look at is actually the max and mins, so maximums and minimums, but these are looking at our y values, the y values. So here, our max, and these are going to be our definitions for this. Our maximums are going to be our peaks of the graphs, and our minimums are going to be our valleys. So when I say peaks, I mean we're going to come up, like if we had like a hill right there, that means the crest of the mountain, the top of that mountain, that's going to be considered a maximum. And then like if you think also about like hills and valleys and mountains and everything of that sort, if you come down here and it goes down to lowest point, that's like that valley down there. So that valley that comes right back up. So that lowest point is going to be your minimum. So max is the peak, that the crest, and then the lowest part is going to be your minimum. All right. Now with this, when it comes to all that's going on, there's a thing called absolute max and absolute min. Now, one of the things you will see is with this, sometimes you might hear the word global. So it could be called a global max, global min. So it could be a global max, global min, or absolute max, absolute min. They mean the exact same thing. So just in case you see both. All right, so here, the highest point is the max, the absolute highest point, and the absolute lowest point, min, are the points on the graph. So that's what our absolute ones are, the absolute highest or the absolute lowest. Again, absolute highest or the absolute lowest point on the graph. All right, and then a relative or local, and sometimes you will hear relative max, relative min, or local max, local min, and they mean the exact same thing. Now, these are the peaks, the max, and the valleys, the mins, that are not absolute. So if they're not the highest point or absolutely the lowest point, but yet they're still a peak or a valley, they're considered relative. So with that, as we go through this next part, go to the examples and stuff, we will find some that actually are absolute maxes, some of them are absolute mins, some of them that are just relative or local max and mins. So that's what we're going to deal with. So again, absolute highest one is your max, absolute lowest one is your min, and then the rest of them that are peaks and valleys, those are the relative ones, like the relatives. All right, so let's move on into example 3. And we have this wonderful graph going on right here. Let's make sure we can get everything into the picture. Let's zoom out a little bit so we can get everything in the picture. There we go. All right, so we have this wonderful, wonderful graph here. And as you can see, there's an open circle here, but everything else is a closed circle. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that's distinguishable. You can actually tell that that is what's going on. So everything is a closed circle except for that last point on the left. Sorry, on the right, my fault. On the right. All right, so all of this, again, it goes up and down, everything, and we're going to label our maxes and our mins, absolute and relative. So we're going to deal with our absolute ones first, absolute max, absolute min, then we're going to come and deal with our relative max and min. All right, so with this, as we're going through and we're talking about it, our absolute max has to be the absolute highest point on the graph. So as we're coming here, we see, okay, that's a high point right there, okay, but then it's not necessarily the highest point on the graph. So let's keep going. We get up to this point and we're like, oh, okay, that's got to be the max right there, absolute max, that's highest. But something is wrong with that point. There is an open circle there. And remember, open circles means there is no value at that point. So if there's no value at that point, we really can't have an absolute max at that point. And so with this part, because that's not a closed circle, that would be whatever that point would have been, that would have been the max. You can't say this is the absolute max because these values right here are actually higher than that. So in this case, we would say there is no maximum, no absolute max. So there is no absolute max at all there. Okay, so we see, okay, an open circle means there's nothing there, so we can't have that value. So let's see, hopefully there is an absolute min then. There's somewhere that's the absolute lowest point on the graph. All right, so let's take a look and see where is the very lowest point of the graph. So we know we have a valley here, we have a valley here, but then we also have a very low point right here. And that's a closed circle, so it means it exists. There's a value there, there's a point there. So if that's happening, that means that that would be our absolute min. Cool. So let's go ahead and write that point down. So we would say that is what? -6, -5. Now, one thing I want you to get used to is writing it out like in word form. So we have an absolute min, and we're going to write it out like this because just like we wrote on the last page at the very top, we said that we're talking about our y values here. So with this, we're talking about max and min. We're going to have an absolute min, of, let's see, that's a min of, the y value here is -5. Again, y value is -5. So we have a min of -5 at x equals -6. So the minimum absolute min is going to happen at -5 when x equals -6. So we have so let me rephrase that. Let me say that again. We have an absolute min of -5 at x equals -6. So the lowest part of the graph is at -5, but that actually happens at x equals -6. So here and there. And again, your max and your min are the y values. This part right here. This part right here. Okay. So with that, if it doesn't make sense, it's okay to ask questions and just make sure you can get clarification, understand what's going on and why that is. All right, so then the rest of these are going to be relative maxes and mins. Again, maxes are our peaks. So we have a peak there, we got a peak there, and then that's it. That's only 2 peaks. All right, so we're going to put down our relative maxes are at -5, 0, and at -2, 4. So we have relative maxes at those 2 points. But again, when it comes to these, our max and mins are actual y values. So we're going to rewrite this. We're going to write this in word form. So, oh, sorry about that. That's why we don't write in pen. We have, oh my gosh, we have a relative max. If I can spell relative, that would be great. Oh my goodness. This is why I don't write in pens, guys. We have a relative max of 0 at x equals -5. Oh, Jesus, that looks bad. All right, and then we also have a relative max, and let's say 4 at x equals -2. And normally I would write that in, I would say another relative max of that, but I'm running out of space. All right, so here we have a relative max at 0 of 0 at x equals -5, and 4 at x equals -2. So these are the values. These are the highest points or the lowest points on the graphs, these peaks and valleys. All right, and then our minimum, again, we're looking at these points here. And so here we know we have a min at -4, -3, and at 2, -2. And again, we're going to write it out. We have a relative min of -3 at x equals -4, and -2 at x equals 2. And that's it. That's all we have to deal with. So if you have questions about this, go ahead and ask me. If not, then we're good.